I wanted to talk about how I am able to get funding to hire people to do open source. And it's something that I've been working on for like literally my entire career. The way I stumbled onto it was I went to work at a nonprofit, and I had to, this is the very counterintuitive thing, I actually took a pay cut to move to San Francisco. I moved there, and at the time I was a junior developer, and I was making $35,000 a year, and I went to take a fellowship in San Francisco making $30,000 a year.
Wow.
And
Where did you live?
I lived in a friend's very small place for 6 months until the landlord raised the rent on us, and then I moved to Oakland and lived with Substack, which was interesting. And
I tended to buy lunch.
yeah, every time, like Michael, basically, every time we went out to eat, Michael would pay for all of my food because he knew that I was like a charity case at the time. But it was a long-term investment. I basically, what I learned working at a nonprofit was the names of the people that fund the nonprofit I worked at, and the conferences that they go to, and the types of issues that they care about, and the realization that they know that technology is important, but they don't know how to fund it. And they need people that they can trust to give money to go and make it happen. And so all these things, I was like, wow, there's a lot of opportunity here. There's two ways to get grants in the US. I won't talk about international because it's too complicated. But in the US, which is relevant to most of us, you can either have a rich billionaire or you can have the government. And the government is harder to work with. So I recommend going after rich billionaires. Sorry, that's a redundant term. I meant like dead billionaires. Because they're all rich if they're billionaires. Sorry, I wasn't thinking about that. But dead billionaires are great because they have so much money. Like, for example, the third largest endowment in the world is the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. They have, I don't even remember, look it up on Wikipedia. It's in the top 5. Gates is on there, and Howard Hughes Medical Institute is on there. Howard Hughes established this fund, which is now like the third largest in the world, trying to hide tax money from the government. And then he was like, we'll put it in a medical institute. And he would just funnel money there because then it could sit there without getting taxed. And then he didn't actually do that much with it. And then he died. And then all these people were like, this guy was crazy for not using this for actual medical research. And now it's like basically funding all these professors around the world in research positions. They built a neuroscience facility for hundreds of millions of dollars out of that. And it operates on the interest that they get on the endowment. So they basically were like, oh, we get to, for free, because we have so much money, build and operate this cutting-edge science facility that employs 400 people. So there's a lot of money out there because of our capitalist roots here in this country and a lot of aggregation of wealth. So if you can convince a grant officer working for a really rich dead billionaire, sometimes they're alive, you can convince them to give you a grant. But the trick, this is the hardest part for software people that I talk to, is being able to explain your technology in terms of impact in a social mission. And because the only thing that these places fund is social missions. So an example of a social mission is like what the Gates Foundation funds, which is like health, global health. Another example of a social mission, which is where I'm funded, is preserving research data, which is like the government pays for research, and then the research gets done, and then it gets published, and then nobody makes sure that it gets archived in an efficient way, especially the data. So it's paid for already by taxpayers, but then it gets lost because they didn't build a nice like version control tool for the data, basically. There's other issues in science too, such as when you do the research and you publish it, you yield the copyright to a private publishing company. There's a company called Elsevier, and they run Science and Nature. So that means that when you want to go read the research that was paid for by taxpayer dollars, you have to buy it, which is kind of counterintuitive because you already paid for it.
Is that being changed?
That it is being changed by people who get grants from rich dead billionaires. So, because where's the money going to come from to build? Like, it's a really hard problem because nobody wants to change because there's no incentives to change. So you have to figure out how to pitch your idea as a strategic, like, investment in changing incentives in like a public goods system. So, like, if you can make an argument as to why building a bunch of technology can change the behaviors of a bunch of people, then you're on your path to getting grants. But it's not as easy as, how much time do I have, by the way?
Minute.
Okay, cool. It's not as easy as just coming up with a social mission. And for that, I recommend going to conferences that aren't JavaScript conferences. So this is actually a really good example. This is seemingly a JavaScript conference, but it's about what JavaScript can do in different scenarios, and we're talking about a lot of different use cases. And if you just go to JavaScript conferences, which is what I did for a long time, or just replace that with developer conferences, you'll only look at the solution building and engineering, and you won't look at the higher level stuff, or like the bigger picture stuff. So what I learned is if you go to conferences where you're the programmer in the small group of programmers that are there, or software engineers, or open source people, or open web enthusiasts, you're always like the most interesting person to add to a conversation because you can bring a viewpoint about like sharing data open on the web or making things open source that is like a totally fresh idea to a lot of people. And they might be totally receptive to it, but just they don't employ an open source person or an open web person. So it's really fun to go to conferences that aren't developer conferences. That's what I learned, because you meet really smart people in other areas. But you also have to meet the grant officers. And so try to look at who funds the conferences, and if it's a foundation, then go there and make sure you get drinks with that person or hang out with that person in a social situation. And once they know your name, then you can write a grant, and then they'll approve your grant, and then you can hire open source people.
That's awesome.